the way America became a nation, not because we had a national war, but because we had a bunch of churches.
Wait, what? Did this pastor just say that the church won the War of Independence?
It wasn't the American army, it was the church that did that.
Right. Who needs a revolutionary war when you can just turn the other cheek, enjoy some church bingo, and sing your heart out at choir practice? Religions famously don't want to keep the status quo, do they? No, they're not conservative at all. Howdy yo, I'm not an American, and I'm fairly certain my American accent is nightmare fuel. But I'm pretty sure that this one-dimensional tripe is, well, tripe. It's nonsense.
Nonsense it all is.
What we're taking a look at today is a preacher called Mark Gonzalez. Mark is a Dallas, Texas pastor who's the founder of the Hispanic Prayer Network and the Hispanic Action Network. He's a former chair of the US Congressional Hispanic Advisory Council, and he's worked with the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, Awakening America, America for Jesus, you name it. And recently, he's made the bold claim that it wasn't the Continental Army and its allies that whooped our limey asses, but rather the church.
But because we had a bunch of churches.
Now, we'll get to Mark's incredibly low resolution yet incredibly high energy sermon in just a moment. First, I think it's worth understanding why such a narrative has come about. The decline of Christianity, we've been facing a pandemic of Christian revisionism. Many have left the church because they've recognised, among other facts, that the world we have today is radically different to what it was under the heel of Christianity. In fact, much of the progress we've made has been won against the resistance of the church, be it scientific inquiry, free speech, and women's rights, to name just a few. Today, many Christians enjoy these fruits of the Enlightenment, but they need to find a way to claim it as their own. They can't say that the light in their life comes from secular enlightenment, from such demonic sources. They have to rewrite history. This is why they champion, for instance, Tom Holland claiming that our values are somehow Christian, despite them being, in many instances, the precise opposite of what the saints and Christians in general throughout history have believed. The Christians of old were more than fine with slavery, with even Jesus commanding slaves to obey their masters. And what we're seeing today from Mark is more of the same. His narrative of the American victory in the Revolutionary War being due to churches and pastors rallying for the cause grossly misrepresents a complex historical event. His narrative, like all of these narratives, relies on 1, the flock lacking historical knowledge, and 2, and more importantly, the flock lacking a desire to fact-check their charismatic captain, because he spins a story that tickles their bias.
It wasn't the American army, it was the church that did that.
But let's hear his case, right? Maybe he'll somehow provide evidence to uphold such a remarkably one-dimensional view that contradicts the data, quotes, and consensus of scholars. Let's hear it, big guy.
The Battle of Concord, the Battle of Bunker Hill, Lexington, Boston, all these were pastors.
No. These are events and places, Mark, not pastors. This isn't a strong start.
All these were pastors. That's it. We call them the Black Robe Regiment. You heard of them?
Ah yes, the idea of Christian revisionism that gained popularity about a decade ago, insisting that the Black Robe Regiment was an official part of the Continental Army, when in reality it was not an actual military unit, but rather a term the British used to describe the preachers that supported the patriot cause.
Where they said, okay, my country needs me, so I'm about to go out to the battle. And they would be in their black robe. They would, after church, they're done with the sermon, take off their black robe. And under it, they would have their war garb.
War garb? You mean they were wearing army uniforms? Like the blacksmith? Like, well, everyone. Wow.
They had their musket under the pulpit. I said, I want all the men of the church to come with me. And they came in.
Okay, Gary Sue, now we see what you're doing. You're saying, I want all of the men of the church to come with me.
I said, I want all the men of the church to come with me.
Because all of a sudden, you're not speaking about historical events, but rather attempting to mobilize the flock before you. But dude, if you want to militarize your church and pull a gun from under the pulpit, you don't need to rewrite American history. You're already in Texas, for fuck's sake.
That's how they won Lexington. That's how they won Bunker Hill. That's how they won Boston. That's how they won it. It wasn't the American army. It was the church that did that.
And the crowd goes wild with yet another angry pastor, in the name of loving Jesus, of course, issuing unsubstantiated bold claims. But I'm different. I'd like to see some receipts, Mark. A little bit of evidence, if you please.
I don't got time to get into all this history.
Oh, that's a shame. And what do you know, incredibly convenient. But I guess you don't need to back up your bullshit, Mark, because your flock is sucking it up regardless. So what now? Do we just move on, end the video, citing that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence?
You're gonna go look it up for yourself.
Now, that's an idea. Alright, why not? First, I encourage you to fact check me. Don't let my tickling your bias do the work. And I'm going to keep this brief because I'm going to assume that you'll bounce if I was to spend 20 minutes unpacking the details of a complex, multifaceted and prolonged event. Still, I'll do better than Mark. As said earlier, the Black Robe Regiment was not an actual part of the Continental Army, but rather a British term for the influence that some preachers exerted in support of the Patriot cause. In the 1770s, most colonists still considered themselves aligned with England. In fact, many parishioners questioned the fundamental legitimacy of revolution, of separating from Britain and consequently the Church of England. And this makes sense, right? Considering that religious people tend to be conservative, and the conservative view at the time was to conserve the crown. Not to mention that the British themselves were equally Christian, with the Church of England being the official religion of the state, as it still is today. So the fact that some of those fighting for independence were Christian or even pastors is no more surprising than any other attribute of a person fighting for independence. Basically, as is the case today, Christians were not monolithic in their faith, nor their political alignment. As always, the objective morality of the Bible happened to fit mutually exclusive views, so that it could claim victory in any case. How peculiar, how convenient. Lastly, these preachers always seem to forget that the United States is a secular country. Unlike Britain, the US explicitly has a separation of church and state in its constitution. Many of the founding generation, products of the Enlightenment, emphasized reason and rational explanation over revealed truth, characterizing themselves as deists, believing that a divine God created the universe and set it in motion, but took no active role in shaping or guiding human affairs. A few influential patriots defied any sort of religious affiliation. Thomas Paine, whose pamphlets Common Sense and the American Crisis were credited for boosting the support for Patriot cause, famously rejected organized religion. Asserting that my mind is my own church, Paine suggested that the various religions appeared to him no other than human inventions, set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit. If you want to get your money's worth, I highly recommend reading what he had to say about Numbers 31, for instance. Put simply, success in the War of Independence drew on Americans of diverse backgrounds, beliefs, and faiths, who unified effectively enough to defeat the world's largest empire in a bloody and protracted conflict. But to claim that it was a victory of the church is nothing more than a lie to stir up Christian nationalism among uneducated masses who are fearful of their dwindling power.